to. I'm a clinical psychiatrist and professor at the Black Dog Institute and University of New South Wales. Look, I really became interested in research now about 25 years ago. I actually had to do a research project to finish my psychiatry training. You have to do a scholarly project as part of your training, and that was my first experience of research, and I thought, gee, this is actually really interesting. And it's really quite a privilege because I'm able to look at new treatments for people with, severe and treatment-resistant depression, which is a very exciting field. And over the last 25 years, I've actually covered quite a few different things. So we've looked, first of all, at magnetic brain stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation. We started that in 1997. Then in 2006, we looked at transcranial direct current stimulation, another novel form of brain stimulation. And that is particularly useful because the equipment that you need is fairly simple and portable so that we can actually train you to use it and then link with you remotely, and you can continue the treatments at home. So that's been tremendously useful for people in remote and rural areas in Australia. Then in 2011, we started our research into ketamine, which is probably the most effective treatment for depression, treatment-resistant depression that has emerged in the last 80 years. And I say 80 years because, of course, just over 80 years ago, we had the introduction of electroconvulsive therapy, another very highly effective treatment for depression. And then most recently, we're also looking at psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, which is a new treatment that's still emerging in terms of the research evidence, but looking quite promising. Although there's a lot we don't know yet about psychedelics in terms of, how well they work, for whom they work, and if you do get an improvement, how long that lasts. And then if that wears off, can you have treatment again? Does it work as well again when you have treatment? So there's a lot of things which we are yet to learn about this. It's two things. And for me, trying to understand what is happening at the brain level is also very important. Like, it's not just some, sort of a magic mist that, gee, why does this work? But starting with the neuroscience, that the studies of brain function after people have taken a dose of, for example, psilocybin, show that the things are happening at two levels. You can kind of zoom in at the microscopic level, and what they're showing, and largely in animal studies, is that you can very strongly promote regrowth of brain cells. That's very exciting because when people are depressed, and particularly over months and years, that your brain cells can shrink in some parts of your brain. So it's very exciting that this has the opposite effect. The other thing now, zooming out at the macro level, is that it causes profound changes in how the different parts of the brain function together, and also how the circuits are firing in your brain. And we think this might be important because when people get stuck in things like depression for months, or it might be other disorders like post-traumatic stress disorder or obsessive-compulsive disorder, it's almost like the brain gets stuck in certain thought patterns. And we all know what this is like subjectively. You know that this is not sensible or not useful, but you just kind of can't seem to get out of this loop in your brain. And you can actually see this in your imaging machines where the certain circuits are firing. And what these drugs do very powerfully is kind of undo those circuits. And that's also why you have all these weird experiences. You can kind of have out-of-reality experiences because all the usual ways that the brain functions together are undone for a period of time. But it almost like gives the brain a break from the loops that it's stuck in, and that hopefully then, as the brain starts coming together again and it's functioning, you're able to sort of reset to a more helpful pattern. And we think that combining these powerful drugs with some kind of psychological therapy that kind of guides the resetting of the brain could be quite useful. Yeah, one of the exciting things about being both a clinician and a researcher, and I'm also very keen to encourage young clinicians to go into research, because these days, I think there's so many pressures, people are so busy, it's like, oh no, I can only do one or the other. But the good thing about having a view of both is that you're very well placed, first of all, to do research that's informed by clinical need, but secondly, once you've done the research, to then think, how should this actually be rolled out as a clinical treatment? Because clinical treatments, policies, and procedures are different to research protocols, policies, and procedures. You don't simply just take a research study and think, oh, that's what they did in this, read the paper, and then that becomes your clinic, and you do exactly the same. You kind of got to think through now in a different framework, the clinical framework, what would this look like? And we've done this process now for transcranial magnetic stimulation, transcranial direct current stimulation, and ketamine, so that I'm hoping that we'll be able to do this as well for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies, where I'm involved in some research studies, including in treatment-resistant depression, also other studies. But what we learn from that, we then have to think, okay, how can we then sensibly translate this into the clinic to have really good quality clinics? I'm not interested so much in kind of mass like McDonald's style type, drive-through almost clinics, but really if we were to think what would a state-of-the-art best practice clinic look like to really target that. And then we also run training courses to share that knowledge with other clinicians. So we run training courses at the Black Dog Institute on transcranial magnetic stimulation, transcranial direct current stimulation, ketamine, and I'm also involved in a teaching course for electroconvulsive therapy because, again, I'm equally as passionate about improving clinical practice and as much as possible helping everyone to do best practice as I am about doing research into new treatments. And the two are not different aims, they're very closely connected. So transcranial magnetic stimulation, as it sounds like, it is stimulating the brain using magnetic fields. So there's no direct electricity involved. You have a coil placed on your head. You can see the equipment behind me. That sits on your head. Magnetic pulses are emitted from the coil. They pass through your skull into the underlying brain, where they almost kind of like tickle the brain cells to then fire. And then your brain cells fire and circuits within your brain are driven, and research studies which have been going on now for about 30 years have shown that TMS is an effective treatment for depression, also for obsessive compulsive disorder, also for symptoms of schizophrenia, and a few other disorders, and new applications are being researched all the time. So it's been a tremendously useful treatment. I've now been doing TMS for over 25 years, and the people we've found who have been particularly helped are either people who can't tolerate standard medications because of side effects, or people who haven't done well with standard medications. And because we're trying to arrive at the same endpoint but by a different pathway, that rather than taking a medication, we're actually stimulating the brain directly, we found that people who don't respond to medications can still do quite well with TMS. And then there's another new treatment called, they're very wordy, transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS for short, and that is different to TMS. It's two electrodes placed on the head, and between which a very, very small current is passed. It's the same as the kind of current that comes out of a 9-volt battery. And sort of people who've had to say to me, oh, this is like, putting the battery in the tongue when you were in school. So that's a similar kind of sensation you get. You're wide awake all the time with both TMS and TDCS. It's applied for about half an hour a day, every weekday or every day for a number of weeks. And it has also been shown to be an effective treatment for depression. And one of the things that we've pioneered here at the Black Dog Institute and University of New South Wales is developing a whole protocol for doing this at home. Because if you have to come into the clinic every day for half an hour and go out again for a number of weeks, it becomes very time consuming. But we've actually published the first study in the world of using TDCS at home to treat depression. We bring people in for half a day to train them up in the technique. We actually make sure that all their technique is good. You get a mini test, a bit like a mini version of like a driving test, but a TDCS application test. And then we send you home. We actually do a video link with you for the first few days just to make sure that you're still getting it right. We communicate with you each day. People send in their scores to tell us how they're going, and then we send them a code for the next treatment. So it's very much a a clinician-guided treatment. It's not kind of do it by yourself and hope for the best. And we found that this can be very useful for some people who just need that extra bit of help in staying well or preventing the depression from coming back. And we've had people who come from interstate or even rural areas where this has been very useful, that yes, they do have to come in and see us initially, but after that, they're able to do the treatment remotely. So we have websites at the Black Dog Institute and also the University of New South Wales. Look, I think the other website that's quite useful for reliable information is the Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists. So that's the RANZCP, Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists. And they have a website with resources for the public in explaining these treatments.